Well, some developing news from the first ever stakeholder engagement on farmer income. Joy Business is learning that Ghana and Ivory Coast are proposing a suspension of the sale of cocoa beans to the global market for the 2020-2021 crop season until further notice. This is because there are indications that global buyers of cocoa beans are not keen on adopting a floor price for cocoa. Sources at the Cocoa Board say the proposed suspension by the world's two top cocoa growers is aimed at putting pressure on the stakeholders. Let's hear from the Chief Executive of Cocoa Board, Joseph Boahen Edu, who earlier spoke about the Plan B should negotiations fail.
When we say a floor price, it means below that price, it will be difficult for Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire to sell cocoa. And that is what we want to communicate to the buyers and then the traders, the processors and the manufacturers, to tell them that once we arrive at a certain floor price, which will be remunerative enough for our cocoa farmers, we are going to stick to that. Below that, we are not going to sell cocoa. And we've actually, our technical people, both Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, have worked out what, will go into that living income. That is a very remunerative price, which we believe once, they agree, farmers will be happy about.
And if there remain a stalemate?
Well, we have a Plan B, which we will not talk about now. Because, this matter has been lingering for many years. And now that we are engaging, and it's the first time, this is unprecedented. It's the first time that two leading producing countries, that's Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, have actually, invited such high-level stakeholders to meet over price.
So you had the CEO of Cocoa Board. Let's speak with the General Secretary of the General Agric Workers Union, that's Edward Karaway, who himself was in that stakeholder engagement. Thanks for your time tonight, sir. So we are getting indication that global buyers of cocoa are not keen on adopting a floor price, a common floor price. Why is that the situation?
Well, let me say good evening to you and to our viewers. What happens at the international market is a contestation of different interest groups. So where it is possible not to fix a floor price, people will go for that. And then the stronger party or parties, when they know that a floor price may be to their disadvantage, will certainly kick against it. Now, if you look at our trading relationship with the developed world, that's where most of our primary products go to. They seem to have the upper hand, and they have been always those to fix the floor price. Now, so if it comes this time that developing countries like Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire are seeking to have a floor price fixed at the global level, certainly you can understand that there will be a resistance.
And so we are learning that both countries, Ghana and Ivory Coast, are proposing suspension of sale of cocoa. Now you tell us that the developed countries have an upper hand. Who is it going to hurt really, and is this really feasible?
No, please, may you repeat that question?
I was saying that we are getting indications that Ghana and Ivory Coast are proposing a suspension of the sale of cocoa beans because of the inability to settle on a floor price for cocoa. I'm just asking, who is it going to hurt really? Because as you mentioned, the developed countries have an upper hand.
Well, it's a matter that we either do it now or we are forced to do it, not being able to produce. If you look at our cost of production as against the revenue we get from cocoa, the margin is just small and is growing leaner and leaner. So it is possible we'll get to a point where we may even be making losses. So if we don't even take the steps today, we'll be forced to stop production because we will not have money to produce, or we can't continue to produce with the cost price far more than the revenue that we get. The challenge here is this, and that has always been the weak point of developing countries' economy. Cocoa, as it stands, is a raw material. It's the raw form, and we export it in the raw form. Cocoa, as it stands, is beans, and the beans depend on where you keep them. You need to store them well, otherwise they may get bad. So they are bulky, they are perishable. It's difficult to store them for a longer time. We need bigger warehouses. So if Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire choose not to send their cocoa beans to the world market, then they must be ready to find alternative use for it.
And
one of them.
Yeah, I was going to ask or speak of alternatives. We had the Cocoa Board CEO talk about a plan B. So what is the way around this really?
No, when he's talking about the plan B, the plan B, without even knowing the details that he may be giving, is to say that if we don't send it to the global market, then we have another way of getting revenue out of the cocoa, or we have enough money and we can be able to defer the revenue that we'll be getting from cocoa now to the future, when we'll then be ready to release the cocoa beans into the global market. And that requires that we must be able to store it. And when we are able to store it, do we have money to continue to pay the farmers? Even though we are not selling the cocoa, we should continue to pay farmers as they produce. And then, again, you know that we already have some agreements with the consumers, some companies that we have taken loans in order to supply them the beans. It's just like we are hedging the cocoa ahead of time. So what we are producing now, it has already been sold, so to speak, in the sense that we have taken some loans against those, production that is yet to come. Can we afford to keep the beans and then look for money and be servicing our loans that we have taken from those that we have to supply the beans to? If we can do that, then certainly we can go ahead with this. But it is going to go with a difficult choice, and I believe that as the management of the cocoa industry, Cocoa Board, and that of Cote d'Ivoire, they have considered all this, and then when they say they want to suspend some or reduce the supply of cocoa beans into the global market, I believe they have considered all these things, and then we'll be able to sustain the pressure that will come with it, and the pressure will come from both lack of revenue and then also to continue to finance the cocoa farmers to produce the cocoa beans.
All right. Thanks very much for your perspective. For now, General Secretary of the General Agricultural Workers Union, Edward Carraway there. The Vice President was at that event, Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia. He warned of troubling times ahead for the cocoa sector if farmers continue to receive low incomes for their yields. The Vice President was speaking at the opening of the two-day stakeholder engagement on farmers' income in Accra. Now, Ghana and Ivory Coast have jointly agreed on a fixed minimum price to sell their cocoa beans to over 300 representatives of cocoa buyers and processors worldwide.
Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia painted a gloomy picture for the economies of Ghana and Ivory Coast should income levels of cocoa farmers not be increased.
So far, the evidence is that the wealth distribution is uneven along the supply chain. Poverty levels among cocoa farmers, who are at the root of both the supply and value chain, continues to raise concerns. The irony here is that the primary risk takers are also the helpless price takers.
Some data have indicated that cocoa farmers in both economies earn just 3% of the global $100 billion revenue from cocoa consumption and marketing. Director General of the Conseil du Café Cacao, CCC, Connie Brahima Yves, has been detailing to Joy Business the prospect of this most important engagement on floor prices. He spoke through a translator.
And we will show them and present to them the floor price that is for us, that that will be acceptable for our producer for both countries.
The fixed minimum price, to be known as floor price, is to address the income disparity in the cocoa value chain, as well as derive more value from growing the chocolate ingredient. This hopes to help farmers who are the backbone of the cocoa industry to generate reasonable income levels.
Well, the minority in Parliament says it will summon the Finance Minister to appear before the House over Ghana's debt stock, insisting it has reached unsustainable levels. They say claims by the Information Minister, Kojo Oponkrumah, that government is managing the debt situation well are untrue. Minority spokesperson on finance, Ato Forson, told a media briefing that government has borrowed up to 8 billion Ghana cedis, bringing the debt stock to 200 billion cedis.
Government of Ghana and other state data sources will show that in addition to increasing the public debt by 80 billion Ghana cedis from the 122 billion in 2016 to 200 billion in 2019, President Akufo-Addo had received about 120 billion in both tax and non-tax revenue. We also wish to remind Ghanaians that the 122 billion public debt that they claim the NDC left behind includes the deceptive 2 billion Ghana cedis on account of using end March 2017 instead of end December 2016 exchange rate. Colleagues, it's important that I dwell a bit on this one. The MPP is out there saying that the NDC left the public debt of 122 billion. In fact, that is not true. It is not true because
All right, so the minority spokesperson on finance, Ato Forson, speaking there earlier in the day. Joining me in studio is parliamentary correspondent Joseph Opoku-Gakpo, who's been following this for us. So there we go again, Gakpo, the debate over the debt levels. So what essentially new did the minority say this time?
Well, the bit that they would want to use actions in parliament to get the finance minister to come respond to questions on the issues and to use that as a platform to draw national attention to what they say is the unsustainable nature of the debt. That's what is looking interesting. So he indicates that they've been looking forward to the documents and figures on debt levels, even post the end of the year 2008, which hasn't been released several months into the year 2019. And so there would be someone in the finance minister to provide those specific details as they continue with the analysis. And he indicated that they will possibly use what they call the half-hour motion, where the motion will be moved, the House will have to come to a decision, and then it's a special kind of motion, as they call it, to summon the Minister of Finance to respond to questions on the issues. But they made an interesting point, something you could call new. They said that they've been doing some analysis on government's expenditures on its flagship programs, and they gather that over the last 3 years, government is spending an average of $3 billion every year on them. And so they do that deduction from what they say is the loan to the tune of 80 billion that's been taken. And they're asking the question, where is the balance of more than 70 billion Ghana cedis? And they want President Akufo-Addo personally to respond.
And of course, we've heard the Information Minister refute these claims by the minority, but you've again been speaking with the majority member on the Finance Committee, that's Daniel Abuaje. What's he got to say to the minority this time around?
Well, he thinks this is just them doing what they would usually do in opposition. He says that there isn't much substance in what they're putting out. And well, as far as they on the majority side are concerned, the government can count on their support in how they're going about the processes. And he points to what he says, Mr. Ochima Buaji, what he says is a reduction in the debt to GDP ratio, even though the specific debt levels are rising. And for him, that's an indication that government can pay back the loans that are being taken. Hence, absolutely no cost problem.
Well, Gakpo, you are in Parliament. You know how things work out. So are we eventually going to see the Finance Minister appear before Parliament? Or is this just politics at play?
That could happen in terms of just probably a question being put and him being asked to come respond to questions on the issue. That's a normal thing that happens with virtually all other ministers, and occasionally happens to the Finance Minister as well. So we shouldn't be surprised if they carry through this notice that they've served, and it will not be anything extraordinary if the minister eventually appears.
All right, Joseph Opoku-Gakpo bringing us the latest there from Parliament. Well, the former Finance Minister said Tekpe has also been speaking about the debt levels. He's accused the current administration of peddling untruths when it comes to calculating the national debt figures. Mr. Tekpe, in an exclusive interview with Joy Business on the country's economy, noted the method being used to calculate the debt levels must be looked at again.
Let me not, especially when you say contingent projects, you know, the Sino-Hydro, all these projects that you have referred to have not been put in there.
No, let me make a very...
Is that understanding I get?
No, I don't want to be, also don't want to be unfair.
Okay.
When a guarantee crystallizes, immediately you issue a guarantee, that's the first part, you add it to the debt.
Okay.
We started the initiative of creating assets like the sinking fund, to set it off.
Yeah.
So that they know that, look, we don't just have debt, but we have money in the sinking fund for managing those debts.
Yeah.
So you have to set it off. We started those initiatives.
Yeah.
Money we put in the infrastructure fund to support, you know, investments. You can also set it off. That's what countries do, right? If you don't have those mechanisms, or if you stop funding, say, the infrastructure fund, you know, which invested in Terminal 3, which has stopped. Because remember, part of the money is the additional 2.5% which went into VAT.
VAT, yeah.
That has been stopped. You know, the portion of the ABFA that goes into the infrastructure fund has also been stopped. The sinking fund is not being used to do the rate of redemption that we were doing in the past. Then, whatever guarantee you issued must add to public debt, because you don't have a provision. You don't have a plan
to be able to plan.
Yes,
to be able
and that
to
is when exactly that's when guarantees are added to public debt. So to the extent that the documents, and that's the first part, to the extent that the documents that went to Parliament for Sino-Hydro had the state providing security. To the extent that you remember the first time it was GATT was going to be the one that was going to underwrite, you know, but they had to go to Parliament before they could issue the bonds. To that extent, those liabilities have crystallized. So if we don't add them, then yes, the methodology is being changed. Now, there are those like payments to depositors, right, which on due date, if they are not paid, then we say it crystallizes. Those you don't have to add immediately. But when they crystallize, then you have to add. And these are the methodologies that we are saying that, you know, let's be careful that we are not changing. And this is an important fiscal rule. Fiscal rule is not just about deficits. Fiscal rules span how you calculate debt. And let me give you another example. You remember in 2017, it was at the Public Accounts Committee. End March, exchange rate was used to calculate the 2016 debt, not end December.
End December, okay.
Is that being repeated? Because if you did it for an NDC administration, because the exchange rate depreciated, so you can imagine if we were using end March exchange rate to calculate 2018 debt. Look at.
Who is saying the right thing, I guess we'll find out in the near future. Well, let's move on to another story we're keenly following for you. The annual African Development Bank meeting has opened in Malabo, Equatorial Guinea. The gathering has brought together other finance ministers and central bank governors in Africa to deliberate on crucial issues affecting the region. Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta is leading government's delegation to that stakeholders meeting. George Afe sent this report from Malabo in Equatorial Guinea.
The delegation also includes the governor of the Bank of Ghana, Dr. Ernest Addison, and some senior officials from the Bank of Ghana and the Ministry of Finance. For the next 4 days, the government delegation will be looking at how they can actually close the ties with the African Development Bank. For some, this is an institution that many can describe as a darling of the country in terms of the funding that they've provided for several infrastructure projects in Ghana. One can talk about the Terminal 3 project, where the African Development Bank actually supported financially. Also recently, they actually advanced some $600 million to Cocoa Board to help improve infrastructure in cocoa growing communities. And also don't forget that they actually led the syndicated loan for the concessionaire that came in to partially take over ECG. For some, this meeting will also be a perfect opportunity for Ghana as they try to lobby to hold the Secretariat for the African Free Trade Agreement that is supposed to actually help grow or expand growth in terms of trade within the African continent. As this meeting focuses on economic integration, they'll be looking at ways that they can actually improve trade among themselves to ensure that the continent can actually grow with little aid from the development partners. It would also offer them an opportunity to engage some of these international organizations, development partners, and some world leaders as they gather here in Malabo in Equatorial Guinea. Well, for the next 4 days, it will be interesting developments, and again, trust Joy Business to bring you all the happenings, the exclusives, and the behind the scenes as we bring you all the events that matter to Ghana and how this institution, that is the African Development Bank, is championing the financing of infrastructure projects in the region. From Malabo in Equatorial Guinea, this is George Yaffe reporting for Joy Business.
For George Yaffe's reports right now.